I mean, I knew the story obviously was not adding up from the start, but I knew the U.S. Coast Guard was going to take over this case. They came to my work and talked to me a little bit. They've been trying to take over the case because of the Bohemian government, like not having a lot of resources to kind of uncover what happened to her. And I think with them taking over, I think they're going to really find out what really happened to her. With this, I saw them last week. They were down at my neighbor's house, which is Lynette's mom. And I think they're starting to really get some footing on what really happened. I don't think that she drowned. I think that something happened prior to that. And I think that was the best story he could come up with at the time. But their relationship has always been pretty rocky. Lynette has lived here on her own a couple months, like out of the year, trying to get away from the domestic violence situation. So I hope that, justice is served and they find her body and they charge him.
What, when you say they had kind of a rocky relationship, what did you see? What did you hear? What did you observe?
I mean, I knew mostly from what her mom told me because she would let me know. She lived in Florida in the off season, not on the lake season. We live on the lake. And she just told me, like, hey, I just want to let you know Lynette would be living there, that things are getting bad in the household, that, Brian is violent verbally, physically, that she needed to get away from that. So she would leave periodically and then always go back. But it's a 25-year cycle that she was in. It's not that easy for somebody to leave in that scenario. I anticipated she would leave before something this bad would happen. So, I hope that truthfully they find more evidence and personally hold him accountable for what he is doing, because he's a free man right now. Nobody knows where he's at.
She didn't just fall. Something happened to her before she ever hit that water. A woman is missing. 2 months have passed. No body, no charges. And the one person who was there that night is walking free, his exact location currently unknown. This is the case of Lynette Hooker, a 55-year-old Michigan mother who vanished somewhere in the dark waters off the Bahamas on the night of April 4th, 2026. And the more investigators dig into what her husband Brian told them, the more his story begins to fall apart. But before we get into that, if you are watching this and you are sensitive to themes of alleged domestic violence and a missing persons investigation that is now being treated as a possible murder, please be aware this episode covers all of that in detail. Now, if you are new to True Crime Exposed, hit that subscribe button right now. We cover cases like this as they develop in real time, and this one is moving fast. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you are watching from. And if Lynette's story matters to you, like this video and share it. Every share keeps this case in the public eye. Now, let's get into it. Brian and Lynette Hooker were not your average couple. In January 2023, they purchased a 1980 Morgan 461 sailboat in Rockport, Texas, a vintage charter boat from the Virgin Islands that Lynette described on camera as a little rough on the edges. They named it the Soulmate. They documented the entire restoration on their YouTube channel, the sailing hookers, the repairs, the maiden voyages, the Gulf crossing attempts, the laughter. To anyone watching, they looked like two people chasing a dream together, but that was the version they chose to show the world. By April 2026, the Soulmate was anchored in the Abaco Islands in the Bahamas, and on the night of April 4th, Lynette Hooker was last seen alive. According to Brian Hooker, the night started simply enough. The couple had been ashore and were heading back to the Soulmate via their small 8-foot dinghy. The sailboat was anchored offshore near Elbow Cay and Hopetown in the Abaco Islands. Somewhere on that short trip back, Brian says, Lynette fell overboard. His account to Bahamian authorities was specific. He told them Lynette had the engine keys in her pocket when she went into the water. And when she did, the engine cut off. He says he was left drifting for several hours before eventually swimming to shore. He reported that strong currents had swept her away near Aunt Pat's Bay. Bahamian authorities launched an immediate search. They found nothing. 4 days later, on April 8, 2026, Brian Hooker was arrested by Bahamian police as a person of interest in Lynette's disappearance. He was held for questioning for 5 days. On April 13th, he was released without charges. Royal Bahamas Police Commissioner Shanta Knowles made one thing clear at that point: Brian Hooker remained a suspect. Within days of his release, Brian left the Bahamas and returned to the United States. He has since made one public statement on the matter. Speaking to NBC News, Brian said, "I've never harmed Lynette, and I would never harm Lynette, and I want to find Lynette." His attorney has declined to comment, citing the ongoing investigation. And that is where Brian's version of events ends. But this isn't where everything changed, because investigators were already starting to find details that did not line up. The first major problem with Brian's account was not something anyone witnessed. It came from his own devices. GPS data recovered from Brian Hooker's electronics told a different story about where he and Lynette were on the night she disappeared. According to a U.S. official familiar with the investigation and confirmed by CBS News, the location data from Brian's device did not match the location he gave to authorities. The data showed the device out on the water, stopping at a specific point in the Sea of Abaco before returning. That specific stop would become the focal point of the entire investigation going forward. 2 pieces of Brian's account were now under serious scrutiny: where he said they were and what he said happened. Neither appeared to hold up against the data. Meanwhile, Lynette's family was left with no answers, no remains, and a man they believed knew exactly what happened, boarding a plane back to American soil. Lynette Hooker's mother, Darlene Hamlet, gave one simple request when asked how she wanted her daughter remembered. She said Lynette was a happy, loving mother and daughter, that she was kind, that she always had a smile on her face. That is the Lynette the people closest to her knew. Her daughter, Carly Aylesworth, painted a more complicated picture of the marriage when she spoke to NBC News. She said her mother and Brian had a history of not getting along, especially when they drink. That one sentence carried a lot of weight, particularly given what investigators were already beginning to uncover. Jordan Plentz had lived across the street from Brian and Lynette for years at their Michigan home on the lake. She was not speculating when she spoke about the relationship. She had a direct line of information. Lynette's mother, Darlene, had personally warned Jordan on multiple occasions that things were bad inside the household, that Brian had been verbally and physically violent, that Lynette would leave periodically to get away from the situation, staying in Florida during the off-season before eventually returning. Jordan described it as a 25-year cycle, one that Lynette never fully broke free from. This was not a new dynamic. In 2015, Lynette herself was arrested on assault and battery charges following an incident at the Michigan home. A police report from that night shows both Lynette and Brian accused each other of assault. The warrant was ultimately denied, ruled insufficient evidence as to who initiated the altercation, but the record existed, and investigators now had it. Jordan also made an observation that cuts to the core of this case. She said the version of Brian that appeared on their YouTube channel, calm, engaged, the supportive husband on a sailing adventure, did not match what she knew of him privately. She called it a front, a social media facade. And that's when things started going wrong for Brian's carefully constructed public image, because the people closest to Lynette were no longer staying quiet. Darlene Hamlet confirmed to investigators she had received zero contact from Brian since Lynette's disappearance. Neither had any other member of Lynette's family. For a husband who claimed he wanted to find his wife, he had gone completely silent toward the people who loved her most. While Brian Hooker stayed silent, the investigation grew louder. The GPS data from his devices was the first crack in the official account. But investigators were not stopping there. Every piece of physical evidence connected to the night of April 4th was now being pulled into federal custody and examined with the full weight of U.S. law enforcement behind it. In May 2026, the U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service made a significant move. Agents seized the Soulmate in the couple's sailboat approximately 40 nautical miles off Melbourne, Florida. The vessel was transported to the Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station and formally impounded as part of the criminal investigation. This was no longer a missing persons case being handled quietly by Bahamian authorities. The U.S. government was now treating it as a possible murder. A Coast Guard spokesperson confirmed the boat was being held in connection with an ongoing criminal investigation into Lynette Hooker's disappearance. Weeks later, investigators turned their attention to the dinghy, the 8-foot boat at the center of Brian's account. Coast Guard agents were seen boarding it with a cadaver dog. Footage of that operation was captured and published by journalist Ashley Banfield through her Drop Dead Serious podcast. The dinghy was then taken into full Coast Guard custody. On land and in the lab, the FBI had entered the picture. Evidence collected from both the sailboat and the dinghy was sent to the FBI's forensic facility in Quantico, Virginia, for processing. The scope of that analysis has not been made public, but the involvement of Quantico signals the federal seriousness of this investigation. Lynette's daughter, Carly Aylesworth, traveled to provide her DNA directly to Coast Guard investigators, a necessary step to aid in any future identification of remains. Former FBI Special Agent Nicole Parker, now a Fox News contributor, weighed in on the investigative approach. At this point, they will leave no stone unturned. The investigators will backtrack into the last known moment she was seen based on hard evidence. Then they'll move forward from there. That hard evidence, specifically the GPS data, was already reshaping where investigators believed Lynette's remains might be. The device showed a specific stop in the Sea of Abaco. That coordinate became the new target. If you are finding this case as compelling as we do here at True Crime Exposed, subscribe right now. We are one of the few channels covering every development of this investigation as it happens. You do not want to miss what comes next. By the first week of June 2026, the investigation had shifted into a higher gear. On June 3, 2026, U.S. Coast Guard divers and members of the Bahamian Defense Force arrived at the Abaco Inn in Hopetown, Bahamas, the same area where Lynette was last seen alive. The Bahamian government had formally granted the Coast Guard permission to search previously unexplored sections of the Sea of Abaco. That permission was critical. Without it, U.S. investigators had no legal authority to operate in Bahamian waters. The dive team entered waters approximately 8 feet deep, methodically combing the sea floor for any physical evidence or remains. Coast Guard vessels navigated the area near Elbow Cay alongside Bahamian Defense Force boats, a joint operation that reflected the growing international dimension of this case. On land, the Broward County Sheriff's Office deployed a cadaver dog named Maggie. She and her K-9 team were spotted on June 3rd, arriving at the Abaco Inn, walking the shoreline and shallow water near the beach in the same vicinity where Brian claimed Lynette went overboard. The combination of underwater divers and a land-based cadaver search represented the most comprehensive investigative effort in the case since Lynette first went missing. Jordan Plentz, watching the developments closely from Michigan, went on record again. She stated plainly that she does not believe Lynette drowned. Her position, based on what she knew of the couple's history, is that something happened to Lynette before she ever entered the water. Jordan also disclosed that she had submitted her home security camera footage to investigators. The cameras covered the exterior of the home during the period Brian and Lynette lived there before setting sail in September and October of the prior year. Jordan said she was cooperating fully and hoped the footage might shed light on Brian's behavior and character during that period. Legal analysts covering the case raised an important jurisdictional point. Even though Lynette's disappearance occurred in the Bahamas, Brian Hooker is a U.S. citizen. Legal experts confirmed to Fox News Digital that this does not prevent American prosecutors from pursuing charges. The location of the crime does not determine whether a U.S. citizen can be charged in a U.S. court. And then came a development that raised the stakes considerably. A source identifying themselves as a close friend of Brian Hooker told Fox News that Brian may have left the United States entirely, reportedly crossing into Mexico via the California border, either by land or by water. That claim has not been independently verified by law enforcement, but it added a layer of urgency to an investigation that was already accelerating. Darlene Hamlet confirmed she had still received no contact from Brian. Lynette's family remained completely cut off from the man at the center of this investigation, a man who told the world he wanted to find his wife, and then went silent. As of June 2026, Lynette Hooker has been missing for 2 months. No remains have been recovered, no charges have been filed, and the primary person of interest, her husband Brian, has not been located. What investigators do have is significant GPS data that contradicts Brian's account of the night. A seized sailboat currently being held as evidence, a dinghy in federal custody that was examined by a cadaver dog, physical evidence processed at the FBI's Quantico facility, dive teams actively searching new coordinates in the Sea of Abaco based on that GPS data, and a cadaver dog that has now covered both the land and shallow water near the last known location. The jurisdictional complexity of this case remains one of its defining challenges. A disappearance in a foreign country, a suspect who is a U.S. citizen, and 2 separate governments coordinating a criminal investigation across international lines. It is not simple, but legal experts have been clear. It is not impossible either. What makes this case different from others that fade from public attention is the volume of evidence that keeps surfacing. Most missing persons cases stall because there is nothing to work with. This one keeps producing new data points, and each one chips away further at the story Brian Hooker told on the night of April 4th. Lynette's family is not waiting quietly. Carly Aylesworth has been vocal. Darlene Hamlet has spoken to media. Jordan Plentz has gone on record repeatedly, sharing what she witnessed, submitting camera footage, and refusing to let Lynette become just another unsolved case. These are the people keeping Lynette's name alive while investigators do their work, and that matters more than most people realize. Cases like this one, missing adults, no body, no immediate charges, are the hardest to prosecute. They require patience, forensic precision, and sustained public pressure. The moment the cameras look away is often the moment accountability slips through the cracks. That is exactly why cases like Lynette's need a spotlight kept on them. Darlene Hamlet said it simply. She wants her daughter remembered as a kind, loving woman who smiled through life. Not as a headline, not as a statistic, as a daughter, as a mother, as someone who deserved better than what the evidence is beginning to suggest she received. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She spent years helping rebuild a boat with her own hands, learning to sail and documenting a life she believed was moving forward. Whatever happened on the water that night in April, her family deserves the truth. And the investigation, now backed by the full resources of the U.S. Coast Guard, the FBI, and Bahamian authorities, appears closer to that truth than at any point since she disappeared. This case is not over. It is accelerating. We will be covering every development as it breaks here on True Crime Exposed. If this documentary brought you closer to Lynette's story, share it. Every view, every share, and every comment keeps this case in front of new eyes, and new eyes mean more pressure on investigators to deliver answers. Subscribe to True Crime Exposed right now if you have not already. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Lynette's family is still waiting. The least we can do is make sure the world keeps watching. Justice for Lynette, for